Welcome to Unmute Yourself, the podcast. I'm Nancy Medoff, author, speaker, and coach.
And I'm Beth Knaus, creative copywriter and the owner of That's a Spade Copywriting Services. We are done being polite and ready to get real about confidence, boundaries, and self-respect, both personally and in the workplace.
Beth and I first met when we collaborated on the best-selling communication handbook for women, Unmute Yourself and Speak Up to Stand Out. Now we are amplifying our message and taking it on the road with Unmute Yourself, the podcast. Warning, there may be, no, who are we kidding, will be some adult content. We have a bullshit button and we're not afraid to use it.
So buckle up, buttercups, because here we go.
And we're back. I just like saying that.
I can tell.
I do. Do I say it a lot?
You say it a few times and you say it well. You say it well.
I feel like a news anchor. And we're back.
Yeah.
We are
news anchors in a way, aren't we?
Totes. How excited are you for this episode and the next episode?
I'm really excited. I think this is something that we are always working on.
I am excited because this topic has literally changed my life. So, Beth, yes. Tell them what we're going to talk about today, Beth.
Today, not only are we going to talk about boundaries, we are specifically going to talk about boundaries in the workplace, professionally, around your career. And yeah. That's
because our next one is going to be about boundaries at home.
Right. And yeah, I think it's important to remember, Podsters, that we are going to have a part 2 because they really kind of overlap and it's cyclical. One bounces you back to the other, and you need to have healthy boundaries technically in both places, right? For them to be effective in both places.
100%. And it is not a coincidence that the home life boundaries is airing the week before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
And also because we're taking a break during Thanksgiving week, right? We're honoring our own boundaries and there's not going to be a podcast that week. Right. Okay. So let me ask you this, Beth. I feel like everywhere I look right now, people are talking about boundaries, and I'm not sure if that's confirmation bias or if that's really what's happening. Is that happening?
It is happening, without a doubt. I think so too. I just saw something somewhere else. I don't know, it was on social media somewhere. I think boundaries are a big thing.
What, so this is interesting because we said, let's talk about boundaries like a month ago. So, I mean, we are, brilliant and we are game changers and trend setters. And I wonder why. I just find it odd. Like everywhere I look right now, that's what people are talking about. Maybe because Thanksgiving's coming up, but it's interesting.
Right. Well, I do think like a lot of the things that are going on in our lives today have to do with what we just experienced over the past few years.
Fair enough.
And now we're coming back into not only life without a pandemic, but going back into holidays and scheduling and obligations and celebrations and setting boundaries around that. And, for a while there, it was everybody, the big resignation and everybody going out to start their business and doing everything they had to, which sometimes ignores boundaries. And now we're going to have everybody overworking because now I have heard of a handful of people this past week getting laid off. So,
really?
Yeah. Well, the big resignation, it's going to come to an end, right? And then because we're in a recession, they're telling us, and that's what's going to happen. And so there are always things that are going to push against boundaries.
True. Yep. 100%. Yep. So let's start with like our definition of boundaries or what they mean to us. Again, Podsters, Beth and I are both very passionate about this. And love talking about this. So hopefully you will too. You had a definition from one of our favorite people in the world, Brene Brown, that I saw in your notes.
Yes.
And I have a follow-up also from Brene Brown in my notes. So why don't you start with yours?
Yes. So Brene Brown is known for saying boundaries are the way I can love you and me at the same time.
Love it. And you probably want to find a different word for love if you're thinking about it in the context of work. But, I can love working for you and still love me at the same time or whatever. I would follow up with that with, I love this. So boundaries are choosing discomfort over resentment.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why I love this is because, we're both doing a lot of research on boundaries. I bought the Book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban, which is fantastic. Fantastic. She has a lot of great stuff on this, as does Brene Brown, obviously. So the reason why I like choose discomfort over resentment is in one of the books, and I think it was Melissa Urban's, they talk about if you weren't modeled boundaries when you were younger, if you didn't experience this, if there was no modeling, then it's even more hard for you. And there's a lot more attached to that. And I thought that was really interesting. And again, I go back to the choose discomfort over resentment. What I would do for years, this is personal and work, is I would not set a boundary. I would resent, and then I would end the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Like that would be it. So, or I would quit. I wouldn't quit, but, or, when you don't set them, it is horrible for your relationships. Horrible, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Without a
Yeah.
doubt.
I think that based on my experience personally, they make relationships better. You are training the person or teaching the person how to be with you or how to love you if it's home or how to work with you, or you're giving them the playbook.
Yes.
And I just think I think it's great. I think it's great. And I love it. So
Yes. I think it also, it's like getting the support you need to work to your potential, right? And
totally.
work to your best. And so you know how I am. I always like to look at the opposite. So I'm thinking about, what happens. You need to look at what happens when you're not respecting your boundaries, I think, right? And so if you're not respecting your boundaries and you're not working to your potential and you're not, choosing discomfort over resentment, are you being passed over for promotions, right? Are you people choosing not to work with you because they think you have an attitude, or maybe they don't want to pay the price because it seems that you're
Mm-hmm.
a little moody or a little emotional over
Mm-hmm.
things that really, if you just upfront say, this is what works for me,
Mm-hmm.
to work to serve you at my best.
Perfect. Yep.
I think that that's good. And I made a list here about, what are you avoiding by setting boundaries? So you're avoiding
Mm.
quantity versus quality, right? Because you're just going to keep going and going and going like the Energizer Bunny.
Wait, can we just pause for a second there? Because I think that's really powerful. And I want to think about that. And I want to give the podsters a minute to think about it. What are you avoiding by not setting the boundary, right? So is that rhetorical? Because you're avoiding the discomfort, right? You're avoiding what you perceive to be a difficult conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, this is interesting. Okay.
Because you're also avoiding self-preservation. You're
Mhm.
avoiding burnout, right? When you set a boundary, you're avoiding burnout, and you're, like you mentioned, the resentment, you're avoiding anger and resentment, right? We had this thing on quiet quitting a couple weeks ago.
Mhm.
And my guess would be people who were really taking part in quiet quitting probably struggled with boundaries.
Oh, 100%. 100%. I remember I was one of my first speeches. This was probably a good 20 years ago. I was giving a training session and I was speaking at lunch. They had a different speaker at lunch. And somebody asked me from the audience, a woman, how do you balance work and family? Right. So, okay. So, and again, we call it work-life blending, and it's a legitimate question. And I'll never forget. I said, I don't, she said, how do you balance work-life balance? And I said, you need to own it. No one is going to tap you on the shoulder at 5 o'clock and say, hey, I know you worked hard all week. Why don't you go home? I didn't have the vocabulary at the time. I didn't understand that was a boundary. But what I was saying 20 years ago was, you're responsible for it. And to your point, the flip side of that is, if you don't, you will burn yourself out. And frankly, I think that's on you. I do. I know that's not a popular opinion, but if you're not advocating for what you need to succeed, then that is on you.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I'm sure there are those special particular situations where it doesn't really matter, but I think those are definitely in the small minority. And you really need to advocate for yourself, because you're right. I mean, who's going to tell you, oh, please go home and stop working? So what that made me think of is that if you don't have boundaries and you're working and working and working and burning yourself out and caught up in the quantity versus quality thing, you're also not noticing how your company is benefiting from you, because you're not taking the time to notice your wins and acknowledge your achievements, where really you should be able on Friday at 4 o'clock to say, you know what? I had a bang up week. I did this, I did this, I did this. I got this new client, I made this money, I blah, 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 blah. I feel really good about what I did. And yes, I do deserve to leave at 4 o'clock, because nobody else is going to be tracking every little success you have each week. You have to track it, right? And sometimes we get to Friday and we're like, uh-oh, I think I'm going to put in an extra hour because
or Saturday morning, right?
I need to up my game. So it's really the awareness of that, and knowing when it's suitable to say, okay, I need to put in a little extra time, or I deserve to take some time.
Well, let me ask you this. How did you first come to understand boundaries and their power?
So I think generally for me, so when I was divorced and I was working at home, I would, be doing people's hair at all kinds of crazy hours. I had a client who would come at 7:30 in the morning. I'd be, rearranging things to take other people and be in the basement till 9:30 at night. If I do that for long enough, I get sick. I get sick.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
The stress of it and everything else. And it's like, if you don't acknowledge that your body needs you to stop, whether it's your mind or physically your body's going to tell you. Right?
Yeah.
Flash neon sign.
Yep. Yep. What'd you do with that client? Did you keep working with her, by the way, at 7:30 or?
Well, sometimes I did, but what I would do is make sure I had the time during the day to just decompress or whatever, and just be ready and re-energized to do it at night, whatever it took.
Yeah. It's interesting because I remember exactly where I was. I was in the car and I was listening to a Brene Brown podcast. So it must have been fairly recently, probably last 5 years, maybe. And I remember, because I had none growing up, zero in my family, zero. And if any of my families are listening to this, if any of my family members are listening to this, I'm right. So I'm like, oh, this is interesting. You mean I can actually say no, or I can actually say, if you do this, this is what's going to happen. Or if you don't, I don't need you to do that, or no, thank you. Or, one of the most recent example, which I love, is we're not having guests over Thanksgiving, right? So we're not having guests over Thanksgiving. I know you're going to be really upset. And if we could, we would. And maybe you can come the weekend after or before, or what. It's just, we're not having guests over Thanksgiving. And I remember listening to Brene Brown and thinking to myself, I get to decide how people treat me. Like, wait a minute. And her podcasts are great. She does a script too. She says clear and kind. And we're going to talk about how to set boundaries in a minute. But I remember I was like, wow, this was mind blowing and game changing. And I'm thinking about one person in particular in my life that is very difficult, very difficult. I might get emotional about it, but very difficult. And it's a no win for me to try to engage. And it's just bad. It's a bad situation. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to do this. I can say, I can't say, FO, you're out of my life, but I can say, if you do this, then this will happen. If we're going to talk about politics, I'm not going to stay for dinner. I'm pulling this wherever, right? So if you send me an email on a Saturday morning, know that I'm not going to be able to respond until Monday or whatever the case may be. And I'm telling you, Podsters, this will change your life. And it takes practice and it takes a script. And the first few times you do it, because you want to be very clear and very kind and not over explain, and it will change your life. It'll change your life. So for work, because I want to bring this back to work, I was working for a very toxic boss, awful. And she used to text me during meetings. Like Beth and I are recording the podcast right now, right? And I'm looking at her on Zoom. She's looking at me. If Beth were this toxic boss I was talking about, she would be texting me as we were speaking. So like I would be on a meeting presenting and she would be texting me, say this next, say this next, say this next, whatever. So finally I said, if you continue to text me during meetings, I'm going to turn off my work phone and I'm going to, not, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Or I might've just turned it off. I can't remember. And she would text me late at night. And I remember saying, if you continue to text me at 1:00 in the morning, I'm going to have to get another phone because, I need to leave my phone on for personal reasons, blah, 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 blah. But so my point, Podsters, is, and I'm all over the place, that it's life-changing. You get to live the life you want to live. It's not up to someone else. They don't get to decide what you do, how you act, and who you are. You do.
Right.
Let that sink in.
Yes. Yes. I actually just wrote down, when you set your own boundaries, it helps those who can't.
Oh, I love that. You made that up?
I made it up just this minute.
I don't believe you made that up.
Well, so I have two people in my life
Mhm.
who are actually on silence on my phone. So when they call or text, there's no noise that goes off, and I see it when I'm available to see it.
Mhm.
And I feel like it's people like that that need you to say, oh, there's a line right there.
Right. Right.
And then they'll go, oh, I didn't realize, I didn't think about that.
Right. And they don't care. Like they don't get upset. Like I have never had anybody call me on a
It's
boundary
almost
ever.
like you gave them this valuable information. They're
Right.
like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that that's a thing. Well, yeah, because you're so busy running over your own boundaries that you're running over everyone else's too.
Right.
So
Yep. I love it. So bringing it back to work, because I also heard this on a podcast, because everywhere I go, it's boundaries. So contracts are boundaries at work, right? If you're thinking I really can't set boundaries at work because whatever your rationale is, you set boundaries with contracts, you set it with pricing, you set it with refunds, you set it with when you choose and choose not to respond to emails, texts, time you put into a project, help with a project, right? Right? What if you don't want someone's help? This was a Melissa Urban example. No, thank you. When I need your help, I'll let you know. I mean, that sounded a little kind of harsh, but no, thank you. I'm not ready for your help yet. When I am, I'll let you know. Thank you so much. The end, right?
yeah, I wrote down a little list here just in case people were like, well, what do boundaries look like at work? Right.
Mhm.
So, whatever, like for me, as someone who works for myself, it's what my services include and maybe what people are looking to get extra, whether it's time on the call or, oh, you just wrote my website copy. Can you just help me with this one other small thing over here? And I'm not saying that I don't ever do that, but I get to choose.
Right. It's not a given.
I
Right.
have the time. And let's face it, we all have dream clients and then we all have difficult clients. And if a dream client asks you to do something and you're like, this is going to take me 15 minutes, going to make me look really good, I'm going to do it. But if it's, a client who has no boundaries and is a difficult client, that 15 minutes could turn into hours of work that you didn't intend to do. So that's a space. Honoring your own time. I'm not looking at my work over the weekend. Not doing it. right? It's so tempting because I think when you love what you do and you're thinking about it and, oh, I could do this and, oh, I could do that, it's very tempting to jump in. But I think it's really great to set a boundary and say, it's great for me to be curious and exploring in my mind and thinking about things in that fun, exciting way. It doesn't mean I have to implement right at that moment.
Can I just pause there and because I want to bring it to other people that work for corporate America. So this example would be, what if you don't work for yourself, right? And you have a boss that sends you an email at 9:30 on a Thursday night and says, I need the numbers now, right? Which, by the way, happened to me. So I got off the couch and did it. This was years ago. So the first thing is, so there's a couple of things. One, you don't have to rent the Goodyear blimp and put your boundary on the blimp and say, I am not answering emails on the weekends. You can actually set the boundary. And I have a friend that did this really well by just living it. So I was working for a company or a team where emails all weekend long, all day, every day, all weekend long, nuts, crazy. And this particular person never answered them on the weekends. And I'm like, how do you not answer these? Right? Because if you didn't answer them by the time you got back on Monday, you were like 25 strings behind in the email. She said, I can't. I have children. I cannot. I have other priorities. So she didn't make a declaration. She didn't have a heart to heart. She simply said to me, because I asked, because I'm like, wow, to your point, right? You're helping somebody who doesn't know how to do it. She's like, I'm just not doing it. I was like, wow. And so for those of you that work in corporate America and are at the mercy of a boss rather than a client, both are equally as important. I would say, to Beth's point, it's up to you whether or not you work on the weekend.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I also think, honoring job descriptions. I remember once I was working with this client and I was writing website copy for this woman, and she said to me, that's really good. But like, what about the pictures on the website? And I said to her, well, that's not what I really do, but I have a WordPress site like you. And so I can try to help you, put a picture or two up there. And she'd say, oh, so you only do the writing? And I'd say, yes. And we get on another call and she would say to me, but what about this? Or what about that? And can you help me change the color in the background on my page? And I'd say to her, well, again, I'm familiar with WordPress. It is not what I do, but I would certainly go in and take a look for you. Oh, and at one point she said to me, I get it now. You only do the writing. And I was like, oh man, only.
Right. Thank you. Right.
Yeah. So, just really saying that's not what I do.
Right.
And again, depending on the client type of relationship you have, sometimes it's like, nope, not doing it. And other times
Right.
it's like, well, I think I can figure it out if you want me to take a look.
Yep. Do you think it's different for women? Setting boundaries at work, different for women? Discuss.
I think so. I think it is. And, this is where we're going to have this overlap right into home boundaries because, I love to talk about generational cycles and what we learned from those who came before. And, it's always about, oh, but I want to be nice and I want to be liked. And what will people think? And I don't want anyone to judge me. And I feel bad. And and anyone who's listening right now, if you're rolling your eyes, you have said one of these statements, if not all of them. I mean, this is how it is. We want to be polite and, we want to be agreeable and amenable and all that sort of stuff. But after a while, when you continue to do that, then you just become bitchy, right? Because then you're like, okay, is everybody going to take advantage of me?
Yep.
Well, if you allow it, yeah, they are going to keep advantage of you. So you have to decide, where does that line end?
Totally agree. The other side of that or the other point to that about it being different for women is it's different for women because men aren't asked the same things that women are asked. Yes. Men aren't asked to go get the coffee. Men aren't asked who's bringing in the bagels or whatever. They're not. So women have to, I think women have to do it more because they're in a situation where their boundary is being violated significantly more than men.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And harder for us to push back. Many.
I agree. Yep. And
it's more challenging, but that's not an excuse, ladies.
No, it's not. So let's talk about how to set them. Because we don't want to end this podcast without giving specifics on how to set a boundary.
Yes. So I think that oftentimes we don't realize that someone's crossing our boundary until after it's done.
Mhm.
So I think it's really important after something happens and you feel, aggravated about it and you go, wait a second, how did that work out the way it did? Because that's not, I didn't like that or whatever. Really be aware of it and in your mind say, what am I going to do if this happens again? How did I want this to go? How would it have made me feel good?
Yep.
Handle it.
Yep. Totally. I think I always go back to, okay. So clear is kind. And it doesn't, again, you might not even need to state it. You couldn't just live it. So, let's go to the politics example again. If we're going to talk about politics at this meeting, I'm going to go. Or, if we're going to talk about politics tonight, I'd love to see you, but we've been talking about politics quite a bit and I'd rather spend the time with you talking about something else. So just, know that we won't be talking about politics tonight, or however you want to say it. It can be something as simple as no. I think about when sometimes, I'm not productive late in the afternoon. Late in the afternoon or at night is not a good time for me. I get up very early. It's not a good time. And I have some clients who want to meet at night and I can't, I won't, and I can't. So I just say, that's not possible. How about these times? That's a boundary. It doesn't have to be a big declaration. I can't do Thursday night. What about Friday morning? I can't do Friday night. What about, Wednesday morning or whatever the case may be? It could be something as simple as no.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. No. Yes.
Yes. So I think in the next episode, we should probably talk about holding the boundary because I think that's important.
Yes.
Or we can talk about it now. You want to talk about it now?
Yeah. I'm going to ask you to speak to that. I think you're an awesome boundary person.
Really?
I think I'm doing pretty well, but.
So just so everybody knows, Beth just said, I think you're an awesome boundary person. And in my head, this is what I thought. Beth thinks I'm a bitch, right? So this goes, you should see the look on her face. This shows you how much we attach to boundaries in our head, right? So you go ahead.
I have to say, I feel like people would say that to me, that I'm a good boundary setter.
You are. You definitely are.
Yep. I think I'm a good communicator and I don't have a problem speaking about it. And it's not that I'm not uncomfortable, right? It's not that I don't have the discomfort. It's that I know it's the best thing to do.
Yeah. And I think that's why I think I'm a big fan of them. And because I'm a fan of them, I set them often. And it's not like, here, okay, these are my boundaries. Bleh. That's not it. It's, this is what I need to do to craft a life where I thrive. And this is how people need to behave so that I can do that. So I'm going to feel great about communicating that. And I'm going to do it often. And that's why I get to do all of these great things with my life. Like that's really what it's about. So when it's holding the boundary, Melissa Urban again has this, it's green, yellow, red, like threat level green, yellow, red. And she, again, guys, this is a great book. We'll put a link in the notes. She has scripts for each one of those. So one of the easiest things you can do is just say no. So, if somebody keeps pushing your boundary and pushing and pushing, pushing, no. If somebody is pushing back and asking why, Brene Brown has a great example and I saved it. I'm going to read it to you all because I think this is really good. This is true. This is a personal example. I would love to see you and your family at my party this year, but if you decide to come, I'm going to have to ask you not to drink. Okay. This is very loaded.
Yes.
Right. So at first, it was a friend. At first, her friend didn't get it. And her friend said, oh yeah, I got a bit out of hand last year. I'll have to tone it down. And Brene responded by saying, I'm not asking you to tone it down. I'm saying that if you come to my party, I'm asking you not to drink. Right. So the friend didn't come to the party. If I remember this correctly, it was a big brouhaha. She didn't speak to, they didn't speak to each other for a little while. And the woman ended up stopping drinking because Brene set it in motion, and other people said, whatever. So other people started noticing it and stuff like that, or other people started calling her out on it and stuff like that. So I think my point was that was really about setting boundaries. But I think my point is, if the woman showed up, Brene could have said, great to see you. And then if the woman started drinking, Brene could have pulled her aside and said, we talked about this and I asked you if you were going to come, that you not drink. I'm going to have to ask you to leave if you continue. Like the end. It's that simple. So if it's a boss, it's even more difficult, but it could be something as simple as, I asked you not to email me on weekends. I see that you continue to do that. I need you to understand I can't answer you until Mondays. And then you just act accordingly to hold that boundary. Or you don't answer the phone, or you get a second phone, or whatever, whatever you need to do to hold that boundary. I hope that made sense. I feel like I was rambling.
Well, and don't you feel like every time you don't hold a boundary, especially if it's repeated with the same individual, each time they lose a little bit of respect for you.
100%. Absolutely 100%. And then you can't ever set them again because they know you're not going to stick by it. And you lose a little respect for yourself, not to mention.
Absolutely. Because then afterwards you're like, God, why didn't I say what I should have said? Why did I let that person do this to me? Why am I weak? Why did I back down? And then you're beating yourself up afterwards. So then there's two people beating you up.
So let me ask you this. What would you do if, and we'll get into this in the next episode, let's take the politics example again. Let's say you and I were going out to dinner. We were going to Sweet Basil in Needham. And you said, Nance, I'm really looking forward to dinner. I want to make sure we don't talk about politics. And I want to let you know ahead of time that that's a little triggering for me right now. Okay, right, great. And then I start talking about politics at dinner. What would you do?
I would say, you know what? I don't really want to talk about that.
Yeah, but Beth, it's like, by the way, this is totally off the cuff, everyone. But Beth, like, how can you not talk about it? The announcement just came out today. Like, what do you mean? How can you, we need to, it's our job to talk about this.
And I would say that's just one piece of the pie. There's plenty of other things for us to talk about.
But this is really important to me, and I really value your opinion, and I really need to talk about it.
Well, then you need to find somebody who finds it equally important and wants to have that conversation with you.
I have a microphone. I would drop it because that was a drop the mic response. And Beth was really clear and kind, right? It's not, what, check please, I'm out of here. That's not it. It's you're calm, and you're calm because you know what you need to do. And you know how important this is for you to be happy, or for you to be balanced, or for you to thrive, right?
Yes. Yes. And would it be uncomfortable? Yes, it would be uncomfortable, but less uncomfortable than getting into a political debate.
I have to tell you, the more I do it, the less I feel uncomfortable when I hold them. Yes. Because to me, it's the ultimate yes. Like, I was worried about this. I set the boundary. They honor the boundary. Yes. Like, that's a win.
And you're serving yourself. You're showing yourself that you matter enough.
Yep.
You are respecting your boundaries.
Love it. Okay, great. Next episode is going to be about boundaries at home.
Yes.
Which is going to be awesome.
Yes.
I wanted to mention a couple things. So for those of you who gave us written reviews on Apple Podcasts, thank you. Your non-alcoholic beverage of choice will be arriving shortly. And for those of us who haven't yet, if you're listening and you like the podcast, we can't tell you enough how much a review helps us. So click away. We would love to hear from you. The other thing is, we've heard from a couple people with topic requests. We love it. We're going to do it. There's a couple in particular that we're going to cover in January. So please stay tuned. We're very excited. You can find us at our respective websites that are in the show notes. And we also realize that we are underutilizing ourselves here by not telling everybody when we have different programs that we're running in our business. So we're going to get better about that, and more to follow.
Yes.
Okay. Are you going to go set a boundary today?
Am I going to set a boundary today? Yeah, I'm going to be hunting for one now.
Somebody told me that I once said, who can I boundary today? I thought that was hilarious. I don't remember saying that, but I'm sure I did.
Yes, that same person told me you said that, and they love it.
I don't remember saying it. Who can you boundary today, Podsters? Who can you boundary? And
That's
by the
right.
way, let us know how it went.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Peace out.
Bye-bye.
That's a wrap on another episode of Unmute Yourself, the podcast. We hope you found value in today's podcast. We hope you were able to take a little time for yourself and perhaps think about how you're showing up.
And thank you for all of the great feedback we've been receiving. We'd love to hear more from you about what you think, the tactics you're using every day to speak up, and anything else you'd like to hear about on future episodes of Unmute Yourself, the podcast. You can contact us through our websites. Nancy can be found at nancymedoff.com, and Beth can be found at that'saspade.com. Or you can email us at unmuteyourselfthepodcast, all one word, at gmail.com.
We will see you next week, and until then, keep speaking up.